Ladies and gentlemen, we're back, and what an experiment it's been. I'm going to cut right to the chase. We got a lot to cover in this video. We got a lot to cover in a short time, so we're going to get right down to it. Quick overview of what we're doing. We're going to be going over exactly what we've been doing. Number two, I'm going to be showing you some footage from the actual data collection in and of itself, whether it be in Lehman Park or my garage. And third, we're going to be going over all the results that we got for our tests. And at the end, we're going to be talking about how this can kind of help the record at large and perhaps some of the things I should have done or would have done differently or would have liked to seen over the course of more research. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with the conclusions from our strength tests. According to our strength test, approximately all three of the cords lasted a whopping 24 hours for the 5 pounds. In truth, they actually lasted a lot longer than that. I ended up taking them down after the 5-day mark, thinking that that would be conclusive to our data collection. But as far as all three of them go, no single cord broke after 24 hours with 5 pounds attached to them. Now we move on to 15 pounds, and 15 pounds is a bit of a different story. Here we begin to see the differences show themselves. The basswood here stands the longest in a whopping 16 hours being attached to the 5-pound weight. The milkweed is the second strongest in this instance because it lasts for a whopping 11 hours with the 15-pound weight. The yucca cord proves to be the weakest in this particular part of the test as it lasts only 7 hours, contrasting the other two. Finally, we come to the 25 pounds. The 25 pounds is a lot. It's a lot to put amateur cord under strain. So I was pretty impressed with the results from the basswood. As up to this point, it seemed as though the basswood was going to be the strongest one. So when it comes to the 25-pound weight, the basswood lasted a whopping 12 hours, which is incredible compared to some of the other results that we have here from the other two cordages. The milkweed only lasts 5 hours long as opposed to the 12 hours of the basswood. I have no idea why this is. I kept going in and checking the cord every hour on the hour for this period of time, and I was just so baffled as to how the milkweed lasted as long as it did. As far as the yucca cordage go, the yucca cordage in this instance lasts 0 hours. As you can see, as soon as I let go of the cord, slowly of course, the 24 pounds proved to be too much for the yucca and it snapped in half immediately. Now let's move on to the conclusions from our decomposition tests. As stated previously, the decomposition test is testing whether or not the strength of the given cords change depending on what kind of waterlogged environment they are submerged in for a period of 24 and 48 hours. Now, remember, as I said previously, I attempted to use the milkweed in this particular instance, and upon checking twice, the milkweed had unraveled and gone downstream or farther away than where I had originally placed it. Thereby, I decided not to use the milkweed for this particular experiment, as it showed that it was indeed adversely affected by the different environments it was submerged in. So let's talk about the basswood. The basswood, as far as the 5 pounds go, once again lasts 24 hours. I this time did not test whether or not it went past that. I probably should have, but just for the sake of time, I decided to take it down after the 24-hour mark and was pleasantly pleased with my results. As far as the 15-pound parts go, the basswood lasts 15 hours, which is 1 hour less than it lasted with the 15 pounds whilst not being submerged in any type of environment. Now remember, each of these cordages lasted the same depending on what environment they were in, whether it be a stagnant water environment or a rapids water environment. The results were virtually the same. So as far as the basswood's 15 pounds go, it lasted 15 hours, 1 hour less than it was if it was not submerged. The 25 pounds shows the biggest difference, whereas the basswood lasted originally 12 hours whilst not being submerged underwater. The basswood only lasted 7 hours after being submerged underwater with the 25 pounds. Now we move on to the yucca. The yucca, once again, for the 5 pounds, lasts 24 hours, just like the basswood did in its original attempt. And then we move on to the 15 pounds. This is where we start to see the most stark differences between the cordages and their abilities to withstand decomposition where in these environments. The yucca, in this instance, for the 15 pounds, only lasts 4 hours, where originally it lasted 7. Then we move on to the 25 pounds, and no surprise there, it snapped immediately after I let go of the weight. Once again, showing that yucca is the weakest of these cords. So now that we've talked about the conclusions of our test, let's talk about what this can tell us about the current record and maybe what it can help us with in the future. Well, in areas where there's an abundance of basswood, we find an abundance of evidence for the cordage that is created. So in that way, we can see that it reflects the record, not necessarily in the remains that are left behind, but in the traditions, oral histories, as well as crafts making that has lasted from the ancient past into now through these descendant populations. So what can we use to help us in our future research? Well, if we're looking for evidence of production of some of these cordages, and we end up finding a big patch of basswood fibers, we might be able to find more evidence of human activity in this area. So in this way, it's almost like the basswood points the way to more excavation, points the way to more things that we're going to be able to see, because historically speaking, from both the descendant populations as well as the data that is shown in our research, we can assume that they're going to be using these. So of course they're going to leave some stuff behind when they're going to harvest their basswood fibers or their milkweed or their yucca plant, depending on the area, etc., etc. So finally, that brings us to what we could have done differently here in this instance. Now, there's a lot of things we could have done differently. Specifically speaking, 3 of them that come to mind that are of the utmost importance I want to highlight here. The first one, if you haven't noticed, I am an amateur cord maker, and I believe as though that is reflected in our research. I did the best of what I could, but if I were to do this differently in the future, I would have contact with a professional cord maker, someone who is well versed in the customs, cultures, and histories of the individuals who create some of these cordages. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this experiment was in way too short a time span. By the time I got out to the areas I was putting these things in water, there was snow on the ground, there was ice in the water. So if we were going to do this experiment again, I would love to do maybe, periods of 2 weeks of data collection in increments over a year, and perhaps then we could yield results that differentiate through seasons. How is it in the summertime when everything's really hot? How is it in the wintertime when everything's really cold like it is now? What about in the fall when everything's dying and there's more things in the water that are decomposing and bacteria? And what about in the springtime when there's more runoff from the snow and the ice and other things like that? I think that is something that would really be interesting the next go around. And then finally, the last thing that I would do differently is expand our research. I was interested in the strength, but there's so many more variables that we can test. Some might prove to be a little bit better under stress underwater when they're actually being used. Like just stuff like that kind of enhances the experiments, enhances the experience to truly show which one of these cords is the best.